Welcome to Ansakari. We will be covering today the newspaper edition of 6th of January. To begin with, the Supreme Court in the bail hearings of 2020 in Delhi riots conspiracy case have denied the bail for Umar Khalid and Sharjul Imam, citing hierarchy of participation. The Supreme Court on Monday denied bail to Umar Khalid and Sharjul Imam in the 2020 Delhi riots case, saying that the prosecution has shown that they have played a central and formative role and have involvement at a level of planning, mobilization, and strategic direction. It has also made a distinction between all the accused. The judges, Arvind Kumar and Invi Anjaria, have said that all accused don't stand on the same footing and thus have granted conditional bail to five others in this case. So, as to culpability, uh, five people, five accused in this case, have been given conditional bail, and the court has highlighted that there is a hierarchy of participation emerging from the prosecution's case, requiring the court to examine each application individually. Most importantly, the Supreme Court has said that there was a prima facie, that is, at the face of it, there is a case against Khalid and Sharjil Imam under the UAPA. The court was satisfied that the prosecution material, taken at face value, required at this stage discloses a prima facie attribution of a central and formative role by the appellants Umar Khalid and Sharjil Imam. So, the Supreme Court, by thus denying bail to the two activists, has endorsed a expansive definition of a terrorist act, drawing a hierarchy among the accused and justifying prolonged pretrial incarceration. Similarly, it has continued detention. It has stated that continued detention has crossed the threshold of constitutional impossibility as to override the statutory embargo, while the period of incarceration undergone by these applicants is substantial, has been duly considered. The court is thus not persuaded to release the two on bail. So this comes at a time when the Supreme Court has taken a view, a distinct view from its past glorification of liberty and constitutional morality. The court has noted that the incarceration, even before the trial is commenced, can be justified, undergoes a plain language that liberty under Article 21 would expands not be expanded in this new definition, new era of the Supreme Court, where it where its independence is very highly questioned into. The judiciary has taken the view that the state's intervention into liberty and some millennium onto it is justifiable. This is a very picture that is not good for a country based on social welfare and libertarian values, where the preamble undergoes the words fraternity, equality, and liberty. The Supreme Court, in its past judgments, have highlighted that long incarceration is a violation of a person's fundamental right under Article 21, that is, right to life. Thus, has the right to speedy trial, and it has also highlighted that bail is the rule and incarceration is the exception. But in this particular case, the Supreme Court has taken a distinct or hypocritical view against its prior judgments and pronouncements. Moving on, Republican leader and US Senator Lindsey Graham, chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, has said that Indian ambassador to the US, Vinay Quatra, informed him about Delhi reducing its purchases of Russian oil and asked him to convey to President Trump to relieve the tariff imposed on India. Mr. Trump similarly said that the Prime Minister knew I was not happy with India's purchases of Russian oil and that he can raise the tariffs on India very quickly. So there is a mark of, of reduction in Russian import of in India's import of Russian oil, and how much it will please Mr. Trump is will will be the story of the next few weeks, and Mr. Trump would be happy with this certain limitations or reduction, or would he like total stoppage of Russian oil import in India? This would have to be clarified. Moving on, in August last year, sorry, since September 2025, Indian imports from Russia have declined. India's import from Russia have declined by over 18% from between April and October last year. This comes at a time when the United States have exerted pressure upon the Indian government to reduce its Russian oil import, and it is indirectly funding the Russia's war in Ukraine. While Mr. Trump has highlighted his concerns over the Russian-Ukraine war, but he has not been very instrumental in trying to dissuade an outcome or trying to take a peace deal. But he is very hard upon the Indian government to in this particular manner. So it is a riddle that has to be solved. Mr. Trump, who has been in talks with Russian president here and now, has not expressed much solidarity with Ukraine, and he has also focused his his country's attention into the Western Hemisphere. He has not been very interested in meddling into European Europe, and so we'll have to see what would be the next step. How would India like to gain certain concessions with Mr. Trump on reducing the Russian oil, or would Mr. Trump like total stoppage of this Russian oil import? Moving on, inflation has been low in the past financial year, and the RBI and the Indian government is trying to achieve a low inflation era, so as to increase the consumption demand, domestic demand, and thus fueling the economic cycle. Mr. Subnavis writes, for two successive months, inflation has come in at less than 1%. What are its implications for the economy? First, the low inflation rates are in part due to statistical base effect of high numbers last year. Households are not convinced about low inflation. Inflation will likely remain low. December number is likely to be less or around 1%. So there are, certain disadvantages that are concerning inflation being low. Macroeconomic uh, macroeconomic cycles and show that the low inflation is necessarily not good for the economy. It can hurt production and the firm's income. So the inflation must be stabilized at a particular level. It must not be very high, it must not be very low, and it must be maintained through fiscal policy. So, low inflation is a cause for concern because when food inflation is negative, farmers could be getting lower income even though production was very good for the kharif crops. This has ripple effects. If rural incomes are impacted, rural spending power gets constrained, and the benefits of GST 2.0 could likely dissipate. In this point, the author has highlighted that if low inflation will inevitably lead to lower income for the farmers, and that would also result in low demand from the farming sector. Thus, the government's initiative of driving the domestic demand, the domestic consumption would would fail because it would be all these concessions, GST 2.0, low inflation rates, the repo rate is kept low. All these things would be, without any help if the farmers constitute a very big population in India. If their incomes are kept at low, then this initiative would be a failure. Further, from the point of view of manufacturing, low inflation, especially on the wholesale side, is not good news as it also means diminishing pricing power. While high output is a major contributor to profits for companies, prices matter. Further, lower inflation has already caused some slowing down of the GST collections. Also, low inflation has led to a situation where nominal GDP growth has tended to be only marginally higher than real GDP, as against an average difference of 3 to 4 percentage points in the past. So, low inflation has different implications for different players. Some sections of households may benefit, while some producers may be adversely impacted. So, the minimum amount of inflation that is needed to be kept keep the economy ticking is around 4% in our case. That would be the target for monetary policy that is shaped by the RBI. So Mr. Madan Subnavis has highlighted that low inflation is not necessarily good for the economy. There must be slight fluctuations in the prices, and the Reserve Bank of India must, keep it stable uh, to the very good point of 4% in the case of India's economy. Moving on, Mr. Jain, a writer at Jindal Global Law School, has written that the Supreme Court's decision to deny bail to Umar Khalid and Sharjil Imam is seen as a serious question of the judiciary's current approach to liberty, delay, and constitutional responsibility, as I highlighted when covering the Supreme Court's decision on denying bail to both the activists. It is certainly uh, the Supreme Court's initiative of forming down upon personal liberty and the constitutional responsibility of the executive's unshielding power, limiting the executive's power. It has been taking a hit. So the incarceration of Mr. Khalid and Shajal Imam, now extended beyond 5 years without the conclusion of trial, exposes a deep failure of India's criminal justice system. SC's reasoning was that this stage of proceeding does not justify the enlargement on bail. While I differ so, the Supreme Court itself has highlighted various times that in long incarceration proceedings, in reality, do not justify their enlargement on bail. So, in its previous pronouncement, the Supreme Court has highlighted that bail is the rule. It is, and incarceration is the exception. And the legal fraternity has, is at a much chagrin that, in their opinion, this case does not account for a very exceptional case because Mr. Khalid, in the particular case of Mr. Khalid, there was not an egregious or central role in the 2020 Delhi riots. He was not even in Delhi at that moment, and this has raised some red flags in this shocking judgment and travesty of justice, it may be called. Courts increasingly undertake detailed evidentiary assessments at the bail stage, relying on charge sheet and witness statements that have not been tested through cross-examination. These are the main transformation of bail hearings today. Mr. Jain has also highlighted that courts cannot cede their constitutional obligation to protect personal liberty, particularly when delayed trials and the executive an undue advantage, and the political character of incarceration is thus evident. Moving on, Mr. Trump has recently invaded Venezuela. He has captured the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, and he has threatened action against two other Latin American nations, that are Colombia and Mexico. He also added that Cuba, a close ally of Venezuela, looks like it's ready to fall on its own. This article traces the three countries, Colombia, Mexico, and Cuba's relation with United States. Colombia have been traditionally close partners. Colombia is a major supplier of crude oil to the US, but relations have been strained ever since Gustavo Petro became Colombia's first ever leftist president in 2022. He has been unwilling to cooperate with US-backed drug policies, expressed an interest in joining the BRICS Plus grouping, and decided to break ties with Israel. He has also called the US attacks on Venezuela an assault on the sovereignty of Latin America. On Mexico, US and Mexico have been a sweet and sour relationship in both the countries' history. Today, Texas, the biggest state in the United States, was once annexed from Mexico, but the relations have been pretty much on the right side post that war. in US-Mexico War. The 3,000-kilometer border has increasingly become a sore point in bilateral ties due to movement of illegal immigrants and flow of illicit drugs. Mexico also leads in the global production and trafficking of fentanyl, a highly potent synthetic drug. Mr. Trump has also highlighted in his first presidential campaign because he promised to erect a border wall between the US and Mexico. That plan eventually failed. Recently, he proposed that American troops would move into Mexico to fight suspected Mexican drug cartels. This was rebuffed by the Mexican first woman president, Claudia Sheinbaum. Lastly, Cuba. The US and Cuba have a very troubled relationship. Troubled relationship would be an understatement. US and Cuba have been sworn enemies since the last 100 years. The most layered part came when Fidel Castro took over as Cuba's leader, and America launched the failed Bay of Pigs operation under JFK, which was a blatant invasion on sovereignty of Cuba. Further, the Cuban Missile Crisis was the moment when the whole world came to a stop and came near total annihilation. The US has long imposed strict economic sanctions on Cuba. Cuba has been under Mr. Trump's attack as being a state sponsor of terrorism. Cuba remained dependent on Venezuela for its oil needs. This would be disrupted and after the US attack on the capital. Furthermore, Cuba has been the place where investment of Russia and China on a large scale has been seen. So, in in current scenario, when Venezuela is no longer to help in the oil needs of Cuba, Cuba will turn to Russia. So this has been a red flag for the U.S. administration. Furthermore, Mr. Trump has highlighted his interest in the largest island of the planet Earth, that is Greenland. American interest in Greenland, the world's largest island, is rooted in geostrategy. It is located near the emerging shipping lanes around the Arctic. It was a key base of operations during the Cold War. The US operates the sprawling Pituffik Space Base, formerly the Thule Air Base in the province. From Greenland, the US can monitor and stop any missile coming towards it from Russia, China, or even North Korea. Similarly, it can launch missiles and ship towards Asia or Europe easily from Greenland. In recent years, China and Russia have been reportedly scaled up their military capabilities in the Arctic, according to an Arctic Institute research paper. Similarly, Greenland is very resource rich, containing the biggest reserves of rare earth minerals, with China currently being its leading supplier. The Chinese government has also highlighted its plans to create a polar Silk Road through Greenland, which has also raised certain eyebrows from the American administration. Under Mr. Trump's regime, a new imperialistic character of USA is being regenerated, and these 4 years of Mr. Trump would remain one of the most tumultuous years this decade would encounter. Moving on, post the tariffs that were imposed upon India by the Trump administration, India has, you know, not only shown a very resilience in exports, not only did it the overall exports of India grow, but shipments to the US also has also been rebounded. So India has replaced its old lost US sales by deepening its ties with existing partners and exploring new destinations. It has highlighted old alliances and has formed new markets, notably exports of telecom instruments to the US, most of which are not tariffed, particularly smartphone, surged by humongous margins that are 237% between periods considered in Chart 1A, that is between September to November 2025. Exports of electrical machinery also grew by 15%. In the period of September to November 2025, India also exports of pearls and precious stones declined by about 78.5% between the periods considered. Gold jewelry exports to the US declined by 39%, cotton fabrics by 23%, marine products by 17%, and ready-made cotton by 4.6%. Overall, the surge in smartphone exports to the US marks the decline in sector hit by tariffs, including the jewelry sector. The shipments to the US, moreover, US continued to be a dominant buyer in 2025 with a market share exceeding 30% in, in spite of high tariffs. So, simultaneously, India has made significant inroads into relatively newer territories. India exported over $50 million worth of marine products to Spain. This expansion extended across Europe, with marine shipments to Belgium surging by 124%, while exports to Netherlands by 56%, Germany 65%, and Italy 23%, all posted substantial gains. So the gap left by the US was filled by a mix of strengthening alliances and discovering new ones. Moving on, Parliament has recently cleared the Shanti Bill, that is sustainable harnessing and advancement of nuclear energy in India. Well, the bill has been a point of friction in lieu of opposition protest over and the opposition demands for amendments and review by a select committee of the parliament. The Shanti Bill would be a major heavyweight in achieving India's energy security needs. The government has boosted the nuclear energy mission with rupees 20,000 crore dedicated to small modular reactors and advanced pressurized water reactors. India's nuclear power sector was has remained under the state control and has been unchanged since 1956. Also, the nuclear sector is governed by restrictive laws: Atomic Energy Act 1962, Civil Liability for Nuclear Damages 2010. So, private involvement has been avoided due to strict liability laws in India in the nuclear sector. So the Shanti Bill would open India's nuclear power sector to private and foreign participation, which was entirely regulated by the state. The bill will provide for private Indian companies to seek licenses to own, build, and operate nuclear power plants. It also opens the market for foreign supplier participation, The bill allows for 49% private participation while maintaining 51% government control over sensitive activities such as nuclear fuel production, heavy water manufacturing, radioactive waste management, safety mechanisms, licensing, and strategic oversight. So the bill ends the monopoly of the NPCIL, that is the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited. It would be essentially a public-private partnership model aimed at attracting private capital with government oversight. The Atomic Energy Regulatory Board, constituted in the 1983 under the Atomic Energy Act, has been given statutory status and has given uh, a plethora of duties and powers under the new Shanti Bill. The Atomic Energy Regulatory Board will be responsible for ensuring nuclear safety, radiation protection, emergency preparedness, quality assurance across civilian nuclear installations. It will issue safety measures, licenses, and standards, and administer the industrial safety provisions under the various laws. So the Shanti Bill will change the liability caps that are fixed as follows: 300,000 crore for large plants of 3600 megawatt capacity, 1500 crore for medium plants of 15 to 3600 megawatt capacity, and only only 100 crores for small modular reactors of 150 megawatt capacity. Penalties for legal violations in cases of severe breach are capped at 1 crore rupees only. The union government will bear liability beyond the operator's cap with additional support from the proposed Nuclear Liability Fund. The bill removes supplier accountability completely. Government's initiative aims to strengthen India's energy security by diversifying the power mix, reducing dependence on fossil fuels and fuel imports, and expanding atomic energy capacity. It will also boost the energy sector, which is still heavily dependent on coal. It will be instrumental in achieving India's net zero targets for 2070. The bill may also revive the stalled civil nuclear deals with US, France, and Japan, reduce dependence on Russia alone. So India struggled is struggling with the solar, wind, and hydro energy due to its geographical and climate variables, and still majorly relies on coal for electricity generation. Furthermore, storage and grid integration costs for renewables remain ever high. So, the nuclear energy mission manages India manages currently 25 nuclear reactors in 7 power plants, 21 pressurized heavy water reactors, and 4 light water reactors, all managed by NPCIL. The opposition has strongly criticized the bill. Opposition argues that the bill dilutes accountability by allowing profit-driven private participation while placing liability on the state and society. There is a fear of repeating incidents like the Bhopal gas tragedy, where accountability and remuneration was evaded by the foreign firms in spite of recourse to civil courts. Removing supplier liability completely and capping operator liability and penalties at a nominal cost as compared to actual volume and expense of damages is considered unreasonable. The polluter pays principle has been undermined, and this compromises public safety. Furthermore, the cap on operator liability does not change in 15 years despite inflation or long-term assessment of health, environment, livelihood, cost of any serious accident. Cases such as Fukushima and Chernobyl point out huge expenses of liability and nuclear incidents. In the case of Fukushima disaster, the actual civil damages were 700 times more than the cap proposed by the Shanti Bill. The bill will also override the Right to Information Act under Section 39, which the opposition has flagged. Furthermore, Section 42 overrides occupational safety, health, and working conditions for nuclear facility. Nuclear workers would be removed from countries' general labor safety requirements. This has also triggered opposition from central trade unions. The, the opposition insists that the bill is vendor driven despite India's self reliance in nuclear technology. It argues that India has deep thorium reserves around which nuclear reactors will build, which should be utilized. Opposition has cited the example of France, where all nuclear reactors are under government controlled, and the bill also is criticized by the opposition for being pro-profit, pro-oligarch, catering to the crony capitalist while gambling with public safety. Moving on, as highlighted under the article of Shanti Bill, that India, though having large capacity of renewable energy production, but does not have the significant infrastructure to cater to the domestic markets, transitionary and transporting this energy would be the next challenge in, in India's journey in achieving net zero emissions and energy security based on renewable energy. A major component of renewable energy is solar power. It has been currently reeling under higher input cost. Solar power consumers may have to pay more for installations of panels, wiring, and other components such as inverters as the prices of silver, copper, and aluminium, the primary raw materials, have soared. They have been up to 10% in 6 months. There would be a cumulative impact upon the consumers. Near-term pressures and long-term outlook must be there. The the manufacturers are eyeing alternatives to these raw materials. On the aluminum side, lighter frames and alternative structural designs are being deployed. From a supply chain perspective, companies are locking in long-term procurement contracts, and governments are pursuing strategic sourcing, including India's engagement with Chile and Peru for copper. Lastly, today, 2025, there was major investment in railways, and this infrastructure has the push on the infrastructure has pushed the goal for India becoming the third largest economy by 2030, with a targeted GDP of over $7 trillion. So it has been achieved by heavy investment in infrastructure, with roads, railways, and renewable energy emerging as key drivers of growth. There has been push upon development of the roads and railways, though the financial year 26 allocation for roads was unchanged at only 2.7 lakh crores, reflecting slowdown in project awards. Furthermore, renewable energy has been emerging as one of the strongest performers, led by large conglomerates, and through also smaller partners continue to contribute capacity additions. Solar capacity rose to 133 gigawatts, and later after the addition of 35 gigawatt, while wind capacity reached 54 gigawatts. Looking ahead to 2026, the sector is expected to see great emphasis on high efficiency solar modules, integration with energy storage, and stronger domestic manufacturing. So there has been a shift from ambition to execution, and the coming years, the ability to extract value from investment will increasingly differentiate winners from the rest. This would be all for today. Thank you for joining.